I have got no wages to pay you." She stood in the blacksmith's yard with her shoes worn through, and her husband 3 weeks in the ground, and she looked at the man with the limp and the weathered hat and said, quiet as anything, "I am not asking for wages." A bridle hung crooked on the fence post, rust on the nail, a single crow watching from the roof of the forge. Maryanne Ramsey was 28 years old, and the bank had taken every acre her husband ever mortgaged. Rosalind Cravens at the Territorial Bank had called in the note 6 months early, and when Maryanne went looking for work, she found every door in Iron Bluff already closed. The banker had been thorough. A widow with no income folds quietly. That was the calculation. So why did she walk 3 miles out to a ranch everyone said was barely holding on? Why did she stand in front of a man who could not pin her and offer her labor anyway? If you have ever been the person no one wanted to hire, stay with me. Tell me where you are watching from tonight. Beauregard Beckett owned more land than any man in the territory, though you would not know it to look at him. He let his foreman take every bow. He kept to the back of every room, and he had a limp he thought made him less than what a man ought to be in a country that prizes strength above everything. He looked at this woman in the blacksmith's yard, dust on her skirts. Nothing left to lose, and something shifted in him that he did not have a name for yet. That was October. The story does not end there. It barely begins. 3 weeks earlier, Maryanne Ramsey stood at the hillside cemetery with her hands folded and her black dress borrowed. The grave was still raw, fresh dirt in a neat rectangle, a wooden marker with a name she had taken 7 years ago and a date she would carry for the rest of her life. The valley spread below her. October light on the far ridges, smoke rising from the town of Iron Bluff. She could see the bank from here, the general store, the church where she had married him. She could see everything she was about to lose. A woman from the congregation stood a respectful distance behind her. Mrs. Harlan, wife of the feed merchant. She had brought a covered dish the day before and stayed too long, asking questions that were not questions. "Such a shame," Mrs. Harlan had said, "and him so young." "Did he leave you provided for, dear?" Maryanne had not answered. There was no answer that would not become gossip by sundown. Now Mrs. Harlan stood at the edge of the cemetery with her gloved hands clasped, watching, waiting to see if the widow would weep, if she would collapse, if she would do something that could be reported at the sewing circle. Maryanne did not weep. She looked at the valley and the town and the smoke rising from chimneys she could no longer call neighbors, and she thought about her father, the wheelwright, the man who had taught her to calculate load weight before she was old enough to lift a spoke. He had lost his own farm to a bank the same spring he died. She had been 14 then. She was 28 now, 14 years between one grave and another. She turned from the fresh dirt and walked past Mrs. Harlan without a word, down the hill, into the town that was already deciding what to do with her. The notice came 3 days later. Rosalind Cravens sat behind the desk at the Territorial Bank with her ledger open and her pen moving in small, precise strokes. She did not look up when Maryanne entered. She finished a column of figures, blotted the ink. Then she raised her eyes. "Mrs. Ramsey," she said, "I am sorry for your loss." The words had no weight. They were a formality, something to say before the real conversation. Maryanne stood with her hands at her sides. She had worn the black dress again. It was still borrowed. "The note," Rosalind said. She turned the ledger so Maryanne could see the figures. "Your husband signed it 14 months ago, due in full next April." Maryanne knew this. She had known it the morning her husband put his name to the paper. She had told him then that the interest was too high, that the terms were too tight. He had smiled and said she worried too much. "Unfortunately," Rosalind continued, "the bank has reviewed its position. Given the circumstances, Given the lack of income on the property, we are calling the note early. Maryanne felt the floor shift beneath her. 6 months early. You have until the end of November, Rosalind said. She closed the ledger, folded her hands on top of it. That gives you time to make arrangements. Arrangements. The words sat in the air between them. Maryanne understood what it meant. Sell what you can. Take what the bank leaves you. Go somewhere else. The farm had been mortgaged for $1,200. The livestock and equipment might bring $400. The difference would swallow everything. She walked out of the bank without asking for mercy. There was no mercy in that ledger. The next week she went looking for work. The general store had nothing. The hotel had nothing. The dressmaker, the laundry, the milliner with the cramped shop on the corner. Nothing. 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 By the 4th day she understood. Rosalind Cravens had spoken to people. A widow with no income folds quietly. No one wanted to be the one who kept her standing. She stopped at the church on Sunday, sat in the back pew, listened to the sermon about providence and the proper order of things. Mrs. Harlan sat 3 rows ahead with her husband and turned once, twice, to look at the widow alone in the back. After the service, the minister's wife approached her in the churchyard. "We are praying for you, Mrs. Ramsey," she said. Her voice was gentle. Her eyes were not. "Perhaps you have family elsewhere." Maryanne did not have family elsewhere. She had no one. That was the shape of her life now. A woman alone in a town that had already decided she did not belong. She walked home along the road that ran past the Beckett ranch. Everyone in Iron Bluff knew of Beauregard Beckett, largest landowner in the territory, more cattle than a man could count in a week. He had a foreman who spoke for him at every stock auction. He had a limp he tried to hide and failed. He kept to himself. People said he was proud. People said he was difficult. People said a lot of things about a man who never corrected them. Maryanne had seen him once 3 years ago at a church social. He had stood at the edge of the gathering with his hat in his hands and his weight shifted to favor his good leg. He had not danced. He had not spoken to anyone she noticed. He had watched the room the way a man watches weather, and then he had left. Now she stood at the edge of his property and looked at the fence line running toward the foothills. The ranch house in the distance, the barn with its doors open to the October air. She had heard a rumor, a single sentence from the blacksmith's wife, spoken without knowing Maryanne was listening. Beckett is hurting for hands, cannot pay a fair wage anymore. A man who could not pay a fair wage. A woman no one would hire. She started walking before she could talk herself out of it. 3 miles along the fence line. 3 miles with her shoes wearing through, and her dress still black, and her future narrowing to a single question. The blacksmith's yard sat at the edge of the ranch property, a forge cold for the day, tools hung on pegs, a bridle on a fence post, hung crooked, rust on the nail. Beauregard Beckett stood beside a water trough with a horse's hoof in his hands, examining the shoe. He did not hear her approach, or if he heard her, he did not show it. She stopped 10 feet away, waited. He set the hoof down, straightened slowly, turned. His face was weathered. His beard was shot through with early gray. His eyes were the color of creek water in autumn. And there was something in those eyes when he looked at her. Not pity, not interest. Something quieter than either. She spoke first. "I heard you need hands," she said. He said nothing, looked at her shoes, looked at her dress, looked at her face. "I have got no wages to pay you," he said finally. She had expected this. She had walked 3 miles expecting exactly this. "I am not asking for wages," she said. The crow on the roof of the forge shifted its weight. The wind moved through the yard, carrying the smell of hay and iron and something else. Wood smoke, maybe. Distance. Beauregard Beckett looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slow, and turned back to the horse. "There is a cabin past the barn," he said. "It needs sweeping. Not a question, not a negotiation, just a door opening." The cabin had not been swept in years. Maryanne found a broom in the corner, its bristles worn to stubs, and she swept anyway. Dust rose in clouds, settled on her sleeves, rose again. She opened the single window and let the October air carry the worst of it out. The cabin was small, one room with a narrow bed, a table, a chair, a stove that would need blacking, a water barrel that was empty. She swept until the floor showed its grain again. Then she stood in the doorway and looked at the main house across the yard. Beauregard Beckett was still with the horse. She did not approach him. She did not ask what her duties were. She found work herself. The chicken coop needed mucking. She mucked it. The fence behind the barn had a broken rail. She could not lift the rail alone, but she cleared the brush around it so someone could see the damage. By evening, she had blisters on both By evening, she had blisters on both palms and dust in her hair, and she slept in that narrow bed like the dead. November came cold. The rumor reached town before the first frost did. Mrs. Harlan told the dressmaker. The dressmaker told the minister's wife. The minister's wife told everyone who came through the church doors on Sunday, which was everyone who mattered. The Ramsey widow, living out at the Beckett place, alone with him. Maryanne did not go to church that first Sunday. She was scrubbing the stove with lye and ash, and she told herself it was only because she had no dress clean enough for services. She told herself a lot of things that month. The second Sunday, she walked into town. The whispers started before she reached the door. 2 women on the church steps. They did not lower their voices. "Shameless," one of them said. "Her husband not cold in the ground." Maryanne walked past them, sat in the back pew, folded her hands. The sermon was about the woman at the well. The minister looked at her twice while he spoke. After the service, no one approached her. No one offered condolence. No one asked how she was keeping. They moved around her like water around a stone, and she understood what that meant. She walked back to the ranch alone. 4 miles. Her shoes were nearly gone now. The letter arrived the following week. Rosalind Cravens had sent it by courier. A boy from the bank, no older than 19, who could not meet Maryanne's eyes when he handed her the envelope. She opened it standing in the blacksmith's yard. Beauregard was in the barn. He did not see her read it. "The note has been reviewed. An addendum signed by your late husband on the date of original execution increases the principal obligation by $400. Total due, $1,600. Payable in full by November 30th. Maryanne read the words twice, 3 times. Her husband had not signed any addendum. She had been present at the bank the day he signed the note. There had been no second page, no additional clause. She remembered the single sheet of paper. She remembered Rosalind sliding it across the desk. She remembered the exact weight of the document in her hands afterward, when she folded it and tucked it into her husband's coat pocket because he had already forgotten it. 1 page, not 2. This was a forgery. This was Rosalind Cravens deciding that a widow without income would not fight back, would not know the difference, would fold quietly. Maryanne folded the letter and put it in her pocket. She did not tell Beauregard. Another small thing she noticed. When she came in from the cold, he had already filled the water barrel in her cabin. He never mentioned it. The barrel was simply full. Another small thing she noticed. There was firewood stacked outside her door each morning, split into pieces small enough for her stove. She never saw him carry it. She never heard the axe. Another small thing she noticed. He had started limping more heavily in the evenings, and she realized he was pushing himself past what his body allowed because there were only 2 of them now to do the work of 5. She was costing him something. The gossip was costing him more. A man came out from town on the last day of November, a surveyor. He had papers from the bank authorizing him to mark the boundaries of the Ramsey parcel for transfer. Maryanne watched him from the barn door. He did not see her. He did not know she was living on Beckett land. He walked the perimeter of the farm she had lost and drove stakes into the frozen ground. Beauregard found her there at dusk. "You have been quiet," he said. She did not answer. He stood beside her, not touching, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold. "Whatever it is," he said, "you do not have to carry it alone." She thought of the letter in her pocket, the forged addendum, the $1,600 she could not pay, the way the town looked at her now when she walked through it, the way they would look at him if she stayed, a kept woman. That was what they were calling her, and him, the man keeping her. She turned to face him. "I should go," she said. He did not move, did not speak. "I am making things worse for you," she said. "The talk, the way people look when they see your wagon in town. You do not need this." Still, he said nothing. She waited for him to agree, to nod slowly the way he did, to let her walk away with what was left of her pride. He looked at her for a long moment, creekwater eyes, early gray in his beard, something in his face she could not name. Then he turned and walked toward the house. The door closed behind him. She stood in the cold until she could not feel her hands any more. Then she went to her cabin and began to pack the few things she had. The storm came in from the mountains that night. She heard it before she saw it, wind hitting the cabin walls like a fist. Then the temperature dropping so fast she could feel it in her teeth. She had packed her things into a single bundle, a change of clothes, a comb, the letter from Rosalind Craven's that she had read so many times the creases were wearing through. She was sitting on the edge of the narrow bed when the knock came. Not a knock, a pounding. She opened the door to Beauregard standing in the wind with snow already on his shoulders and his hat pulled low. "Barn," he said, "the horses." She did not ask questions. She pulled her shawl tight and followed him into the storm. The world had gone white. She could barely see the barn ahead, though it was only 50 yards. The cold cut through her dress like it was nothing. Her hands were numb before they reached the door. Inside, the horses were restless, stamping, shifting in their stalls. The wind screamed through gaps in the boards. He moved to the first stall. She moved to the second. No words between them, just work. They checked water buckets, adjusted blankets, secured loose gates. The mare in the far stall had kicked through part of her partition, and Maryanne held the board steady while Beauregard hammered it back into place. His hands were shaking, not from cold, from the effort of staying upright, of pushing past what his leg would allow. She saw him catch himself on the wall, just for a moment, just long enough to shift his weight. She said nothing. An hour later, the horses were settled. The barn was as secure as it was going to get, and the storm had doubled. She looked toward the barn door. Through the gaps in the wood, she could see nothing but white. "You cannot walk back in this," he said. "I know." He nodded toward the tack room at the back of the barn. "There are blankets," he said, "a lamp." The tack room was small, 8 feet by 10, saddles on racks, bridles on pegs, a single bench against the wall. He lit the lamp. The light caught the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the way he held himself careful and still. She sat on the bench. He sat on the floor, his back against the opposite wall, his legs stretched out in front of him. The wind howled, the lamp flickered. She thought about the bundle on her bed in the cabin, the decision she had already made. "Why did you let me stay?" she said. He looked at her. "That first day," she said, "in the blacksmith's yard. You had nothing to pay me. You had barely enough hands to run this place, and you let a woman you did not know move into a cabin on your property." He was quiet for a long moment. "You walked 3 miles," he said finally, "in shoes that were falling apart. To ask a stranger for work, you knew I could not pay you for." She waited. "I have had men ride out here looking for wages," he said. "When I could pay them, they stayed. When I could not, they left. That is how it works. That is how it has always worked." He shifted his weight, winced. "You did not ask for wages," he said. "You asked for a chance. That is not the same thing." She thought about that. The difference between a wage and a chance. "My father was a wheelwright," she said. She had not meant to say it. The words came out before she could stop them. He looked at her, did not speak. "He taught me everything," she said. "Load weight, axle stress, how to calculate whether a wagon could make a pass without breaking down. I knew more about freight by the time I was 12 than most teamsters learn in a lifetime." The lamp flickered again. Shadows moved on the walls. "When I married, I stopped talking about it," she said. "My husband did not want a wife who knew things. He wanted a wife who needed him. So I became that. For 7 years I became that." She looked at her hands, blistered from sweeping, rough from work. "I have been pretending not to know things for so long," she said. "I do not remember what it feels like to be useful." He was quiet. Then he stood, slowly, favoring his left leg. He crossed the small room and sat beside her on the bench, not touching. Close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Tomorrow," he said, "when this breaks, I need you to look at something." She turned her head. "There was a wagon accident last spring," he said, "on the pass road. A load shifted. A man was hurt. They said it was my negligence, said I overloaded the axle." His voice was steady. His hands were not. "I did not overload it," he said. "I have loaded wagons my whole life. I know what an axle can take, but no one believed me. The man's family wanted someone to blame. The town decided I was careless." He looked at her. "I need someone who knows what they are looking at," he said. "Someone who can tell me if I am wrong." She understood what he was asking, not for her to prove him right, for her to see the truth, whatever it was. "You want me to stay?" she said. He did not answer immediately. The wind rattled the barn. The lamp burned low. "I filled your water barrel," he said, "every morning since October." She knew. "I split the firewood small because I noticed you have trouble with the bigger pieces," he said. She knew that too. "I walked away tonight because I did not trust myself to say the right thing," he said, "not because I wanted you to go." She felt something shift in her chest, something that had been clenched for weeks. "I am not asking for anything," he said. "I am telling you what is true. You are useful. You have always been useful, and I would rather have you here knowing what you know than anywhere else pretending not to." The storm raged outside. Inside, the lamp burned steady. She did not leave. The storm broke 2 days later. The new year came a week after that, and on the first Monday of January, Iron Bluff swore in a new sheriff. Maryanne stood at the back of the crowd outside the courthouse. She had not planned to come, but Beauregard had asked her to, and she had found herself unable to refuse. The old sheriff had retired. Everyone knew why. Rosalind Cravens had been his cousin by marriage. He had looked the other way on small things for years. The town had finally tired of it. The new man was named Hollister. He had come down from Helena with a reputation for reading documents carefully, for asking questions that made certain people uncomfortable. She watched him take the oath with his hand on a Bible and his voice steady. The crowd applauded. Mrs. Harlan stood near the front, clapping with everyone else, her face arranged in careful approval. Maryanne did not clap. She was thinking about the letter in her pocket, the forged addendum, the $400 that had never been owed. After the ceremony, she walked to the sheriff's office. Hollister looked up when she entered. He did not know her. He had no reason to turn her away. "I have something to show you," she said. She laid the letter on his desk. Then she laid the original note beside it. The single page her husband had signed 14 months ago, which she had kept folded in her Bible since the day he died. One signature, she said, one page. The addendum did not exist until after my husband was buried. Hollister read both documents. Then he read them again. He asked her questions. She answered them. She told him about the day at the bank, the single sheet of paper, the way Rosalind had slid it across the desk. He wrote everything down. Then he asked about the wagon accident. She had not expected that, but she answered anyway. She told him what Beauregard had told her, what she had seen when she examined the wreckage behind the barn. The axle stress marks that showed the load had been shifted after the wagon was packed. Deliberate, not negligence. Someone had wanted Beauregard blamed. Hollister wrote that down too. A week later, the courier boy from the bank appeared at the sheriff's office. He was 19 years old, and he had been carrying Rosalind's letters for 2 years. He had seen things. He had kept quiet. He did not keep quiet anymore. He told Hollister about the second page, the one Rosalind had added to the Ramsey file after the funeral. He told him about the wagon, too, about the man Rosalind had paid to shift the load before it left town, about the family who had been promised a settlement if they blamed Beckett loud enough. Hollister took his statement, witnessed it, filed it. The investigation moved through February like water through sand, slow, quiet, unstoppable. Mrs. Harlan came to the ranch on the last day of the month. Maryanne was in the barn when she arrived. She saw the woman's carriage through the open door and felt something tighten in her chest. But Mrs. Harlan did not look at her the way she had before. There was something else in her face now, something that might have been shame. "I came to apologize," she said. She stood in the yard with her gloved hands folded, the same posture she had held at the cemetery 4 months ago. But her voice was different. "I listened to talk," she said. "I repeated it. I did not ask whether it was true." Maryanne said nothing. "You were grieving," Mrs. Harlan said, "and I made it harder. I am sorry for that." Maryanne looked at this woman who had watched her at her husband's grave, who had whispered in church, who had turned away when she needed someone to turn toward. She could have said many things. She could have made Mrs. Harlan feel the weight of what she had done. She did not. "Thank you for coming," she said. That was all. Mrs. Harlan nodded once and climbed back into her carriage and drove away. Beauregard found Maryanne in the barn an hour later. She was brushing the mare. Her hands were steady. Her face was not. "She came to apologize," Maryanne said. He stood beside her. Not touching. Close. "What did you say?" he asked. Maryanne set the brush down. "I thanked her," she said. "I let her leave." He was quiet for a moment. "That is harder than being angry," he said. She knew. The formal charges against Rosalind Cravens were filed in March. Fraud, falsification of bank documents, conspiracy to defame. The territorial court would hear the case in the spring session. Maryanne did not attend the hearing. She did not need to watch Rosalind answer for what she had done. The documents spoke for themselves. The courier boy's statement spoke. The truth finally spoke. When the verdict came, Beauregard told her quietly at supper. Rosalind had been removed from the bank, barred from holding fiduciary position in the territory. The Ramsey debt had been recalculated to its original sum and then forgiven entirely, the bank's board having decided that fraud voided the note. Maryanne set down her fork. "It is over," he said. She looked at him across the table. The lamplight caught the gray in his beard, the lines around his eyes, the way he held himself careful and still, even now. "No," she said quietly. "It is beginning." April came soft. The snow pulled back from the hills. The creek ran high and clear. And in the blacksmith's yard where she had stood with her shoes worn through, Maryanne Ramsey stood again. Same fence post, same crooked bridle, though the rust had been scrubbed away. Same forge, cold for the morning. Beauregard was beside her, his hat in his hands. His weight shifted to favor his good leg, the way it always would. She looked at him. He looked at her. Neither of them spoke. Then he reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded paper. He held it out to her. She took it, unfolded it. A deed. The cabin past the barn. Her name written in the county clerk's hand. Not a loan, not a favor. Her name alone on property that would be hers whether she stayed or went. She looked up at him. "I still have got no wages to pay you," he said. His voice was quiet. His eyes were steady. The early gray in his beard caught the April light. She folded the deed carefully, tucked it into her pocket where the forged letter had once lived. "I am still not asking for wages," she said. He nodded once, slow, the way he always did. Then he held out his hand, not reaching for her, just offering, palm up, waiting. She looked at that hand, calloused from work, steady from years of holding things together alone. A hand that had filled her water barrel every morning without being asked. That had split firewood small because he noticed she struggled with the larger pieces. That had never once demanded anything in return. She placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers. Warm, certain, home. The crow on the roof of the forge shifted its weight and flew. When I think about them standing there, I think about what it costs to let someone see you clearly. The years Maryanne spent pretending not to know things. The years Beauregard spent believing his limp made him less. Two people who had learned to make themselves smaller, finally standing in a place where neither of them had to. Maybe that is why this story stays. Not because of the fraud exposed, or the banker removed, or the debt forgiven. Those things matter. But what matters more is the hand offered and the hand taken. The deed with her name on it. The door that opened in October and never closed again. A cabin. A creek running high. An April morning with nothing left to prove. That is where I will leave them. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you are listening from tonight and what moment touched you most. I read every comment. I am always there in the replies, sitting with you in whatever you felt. If you would like more quiet evenings by the fire, more lonely roads, more silent men who show love through small repairs and filled water barrels, more women who finally stop pretending not to know what they know, come back for the next one. Subscribe if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you do not miss it. Thank you for staying to the very end. I will see you in the next one.